A number of presentations here. I think some of you were here for the last talk that I gave about a 1,000-mile canoe trip. And tonight, I hope you have your hiking boots on and your backpack, because we were going to be going through doing a very rugged hike through some tough country. So we'll get into that here in a second. I wanted to just mention and thank Patty and her crew for all the great programming that goes on here at the Guilford Library, and how fortunate we are to have this wonderful library. I use it a lot, and they're very helpful, and they deserve our support. Before I go on, I would be remiss if I didn't introduce two of very important people in this program. One is my trophy wife over here, Jean, in the corner, and Alexis Jackson, who is sitting next to her. Bruce, Alexis' husband, is in Oregon right now on a hunting trip, and as you will see, Bruce and Alexis are important parts of both of this talk tonight, and I'll explain that as we get into it. Before we do that, however, I wanted to explain something that seems to be confusing to people, and we hear so much about federal lands right now. I want to tell you about some of the places we're going to visit so that we understand what the differences are. The national park system, Olympic National Park, all of these wonderful national parks we have around the country, Yellowstone, Acadia National Park in Maine, Everglades National Park in Florida, the National Wildlife Refuges. Of course, there's a lot of camping and hiking on the national parks. The wildlife refuges are basically set aside to protect and preserve and manage wildlife. And there's not as much hiking or camping, although there is some on the wildlife refuges. But these are located all around across the country. And we have the Conty National Wildlife Refuge here in New Hampshire, and the Moosehorn National Wildlife Refuge in Maine. And then the Bureau of Land Management, if you go west, especially in the desert areas of the United States, you'll come across land managed by the Bureau of Land Management. And they have a lot of camping and hiking in those areas, a lot of ATV use in the west in the dry areas. And these three areas, national parks, national wildlife refuges, and the Bureau of Land Management, are all managed by the Department of Interior. The National Forest System, which is actually the largest portion of land in the United States, 198 million acres. We have the White Mountain National Forest here in New Hampshire that everybody's aware of. I worked for the U.S. Forest Service for 30 years, and a lot of the areas that we'll be going to tonight, doing this rugged hiking, are on the national forests. And the national forests are part of the Department of Agriculture. National forests are multiple use areas. The national parks were set aside to protect areas of outstanding beauty, like Yellowstone, and interpret the natural history and cultural history of those areas. In addition to the national parks, we also have the national monuments and the national historic areas. It would be like Paul Revere's home in Boston. And you find these areas all across the country. The one that we're all familiar with is the Statue of Liberty, and that's one of the national monuments, again managed by the Department of Interior. In addition, we have publicly owned areas in state parks and state forests. And the state of New Hampshire, you're all familiar with Crawford Knott State Forest and Mount Washington State Park at the top of Mount Washington, surrounded by national forest. And then we have the state forests. And those are, every state has state parks where you can go and camp, and Gene and I use them a lot. And there are some state forests that also have camping and hiking, but most of the state forests are set up to sustainably manage the trees and other natural resources within these state forests. There is one other area that we don't associate with these so often, and that is the Corps of Engineers. The Corps of Engineers, part of the Department of Defense, manages all of these big reservoirs that we have across the country. And there is a lot of camping and hiking that goes on those. And so you may run across those as you go on your hiking and camping trips. We'll talk more about those, and if you have questions, just yell and I'll try and answer your questions as we go along. So this is part of 2 trips, this story I'm about to tell, that my wife and I took west. The first one, being a forester and working for the Forest Service, I had never visited the big trees. And it had always been a dream of mine to go and spend time there. And so our first trip was to the northwest, to Washington and Oregon. And this is the Olympic Mountains, the Olympic National Park, just to the west of Seattle, Tacoma. Along the coast, you have one of our wildlife refuges in green here, and that's basically set aside to protect seabirds. And then if you look closely, you'll see around the edge of the national park is the Olympic National Forest, the organization that I worked for. And down here is Quinault Lake and a little community called Quinault. And as you'll see here, this is very mountainous country. Along the coast, the rivers that flow west into the Pacific Ocean carry all sorts of trees down with them, especially in the spring during floods. And these trees end up on the beaches along the coast. And so as you hike along, you'll come to these masses of trees that are piled up along the shore. Really quite beautiful. And the Pacific surf rolling in from across the Pacific. But like in most areas, if you walk a little ways, you can get away from the crowds that come down to visit these places. And this is an location on the National Wildlife Refuge. And we hiked north through the refuge. And as you get half mile, a mile or so, leave all the people behind. And you're by yourself with the ocean and with these huge waves rolling in across the Pacific. This is the Olympic National Park, extremely rugged country. It was a beautiful day, and we drove from the park to a campground on Quinault Lake that I showed you. And this is our truck and our trailer, and you can see that there aren't many people around. If you go to the national parks this time of the year, almost any time, you're going to find crowds, and you find crowds in the Olympic National Park. If you get off onto the national forests and the state parks, there are a lot less people. And this happens to be a very nice campground on the lake where there were only a few people camping there. This is rugged country, and the mountains come right down to the ocean here. You have the Pacific and the winds coming off the Pacific, and they are heavily laden with moisture. And as they go up over the mountains, the air cools down and it drops the moisture and it condenses on the trees. And you have these very large trees that grow there in part because of the moisture-laden wind. And fog is very important to the size of these trees because it keeps the air cool, and the condensing moisture drops the moisture on the ground. And this is essentially a rainforest. And these trees grow to very large size because of that. And these are Douglas fir. The Douglas fir grows to be very, very large, anywhere from 5 to 13 feet. Now, the largest tree we have in New England is the white pine, by and large. It's the tree that was originally cut for masts for the sailing ships, and it was also the tree that we cut to build most of our homes and cities in New England, the white pine. And the biggest white pine would normally be about 5 feet in diameter. And if you take the edge of from here to this place right here, that's 5 feet, okay? The average size of a Douglas fir is 8 to 13 feet. This is 13 feet. So from the edge of the podium to here, if you think of a tree that grows 250 feet tall and is 13 feet in diameter, it's a lot of wood. And these trees are pretty amazing. You stand
The pine cones are too.
Pardon me?
The pine cones are amazing on them too.
Yeah, well, actually the pine cones on the Douglas fir aren't all that really large for the size of the tree.
Yeah.
But there are some trees, like the sugar pine and other pines in Southern California, that are so large that you really have to be careful when you're walking through the forest. They don't hit you on the head because they're really large. So if you stand a football field on the end, that's 300 feet high. So you take a 250-foot Douglas fir that's 13 feet in diameter. It's pretty amazing. This is western hemlock. It's one of the common trees in Washington and Oregon, and it's hard to get some sense of size when you take a photograph of it, and so I put myself in the photo. This tree is about 7 feet in diameter, so that would be right about here to the edge of the podium. 7 feet in diameter, and that's not fully grown. And pretty amazing. And this is a 13-foot Douglas fir, Gene's standing next to it. And we enjoy hiking in these areas. We're bird watchers, we enjoy birding, and if you look right there, that's the butt end of our black lab. and she's always looking for something to eat. And I think there were some huckleberries there, and she was snorkeling huckleberries. So, but walking in these amazing forests is quite an experience. But if you get off the trail, it's very difficult to walk and find your way in these areas. And you can see by the pictures all the vegetation and these trees that have fallen on the forest floor. And walking on top of these trees is one of the good ways to get from one place to another. The only problem that you really need to be very careful when you do that, because these trees are stacked one on top of the other. And so you get a 7-foot tree stacked on top of another 7-foot tree. If you fall off, you can really, it's really serious. So you have to be very careful. The other thing is that this is fog country. Fog rolls in off the ocean. You're out here in the middle of these trees, you lose sight of the sun, and all of a sudden everything looks the same. So knowing how to use a compass is important. And a compass, not a GPS unit, because GPS in these big forests doesn't always work. And Bruce Jackson and I found this out pretty quickly, that GPS, you either run out of power or it just doesn't work. And so using a compass and paying attention to the direction that you're going in is very important. This is my cathedral. And you stand in the middle of these amazing trees, and if the wind is not blowing, the silence is amazing. When the wind does stop to blow, and you have the wind making these 250-foot trees move back and forth, you can hear the root systems on these trees actually move. Sort of an odd feeling. But if you have the chance to go and see the big trees, I hope you do that. Well, we moved from the Olympic National Forest south across the Oregon border along the Oregon coast. And if you've been there, you know that this is just spectacular scenery. And the state of Oregon has done a wonderful job of building their highways and protecting the landscape. And these rock formations, you can see the white on them. These are the seabirds that nest there, and they produce their droppings over many, many years accumulate on these rocks. And the surf coming across thousands of miles of the Pacific Ocean is pretty amazing. Fog again, and as you move down the coast, you go through a series of national forests. This is a national forest called the Siuslaw National Forest. It's an Indian word, Native American word, and again, this is the home of the Sitka spruce. And the Sitka spruce is very dependent on this fog, and we camped on in this very wet campground, and these trails that run through from the campground along the coast are wet and they're very soft. And all of these trees, although there's some other species, most of it is Sitka spruce. And when you walk in this, there is so much vegetation, and there is so much moss covering the trees and the branches that it absorbs the sound. And so it's quiet. And if the wind's not blowing, you can hear yourself think, literally. And it's wet. Of course, our dog loves the wet because she has a chance to go swimming in every brook you come to. And again, all this fantastic ferns that grow along on the ground. This is a close-up of the ground underneath the Sitka spruce forest. And these are Sitka spruce cones, and this is the moss that grows there, and all the other twigs that accumulates over hundreds of years. And if you walk across it, it's very soft and it's wet. And it's ideal growing conditions for Sitka spruce. Sitka spruce grows in northern Oregon, Washington, and especially into the Alaska Panhandle and British Columbia. And the further you go north, interestingly enough, the bigger these trees get. And if you ever go to Sitka, Alaska, you will find some of the biggest Sitka spruce along with the grizzly bears. So you can see big Sitka spruce and big grizzly bears all in the same place. Now it's very green, but if you look closely as you walk through these forests, you'll come across a little plant called the gnome plant. And these gnome plants are as big as the flowers themselves are about as big as your little fingernail. And they're beautiful and quite common. And another beautiful flower that grows and really likes the wetness is the foxglove. We get digitalis from the foxglove. The foxglove is a common flowering plant growing across North America, but it especially likes these wet locations. Well, from Oregon, we went into Oregon, and it's where we met Bruce and Alexis near Eugene. And what better people to go looking for big trees and go camping than Bruce and Alexis Jackson. Both Bruce and Alexis worked with me on the White Mountain National Forest. They began their careers in Oregon, worked on a national forest called the Modoc, I believe, and then the Malheur, right? And I actually was able to hire Alexis to come and work with me on the White Mountain National Forest, and Bruce tagged along, and he was able to get a job on the White Mountain also. And he's a great guy to be in the woods with because he knows his way around and has had a lot of experience. Bruce and Alexis are great campers. They're a little bit tougher than we are. They tent camp, and we have the luxury of the Airstream. And Bruce is a pretty good cook, as well as knows his way around the woods. And when you're hiking in this country now, we are on a national forest called the Willamette. The Willamette sits in the interior of Oregon, away from the coast, and it's a little bit drier, and so you get different species of trees. You get western red cedar and larch, which we know as tamarack, and of course Douglas fir. The Douglas fir is known as the tree that built America. And a lot of these trees were harvested when we were building our cities. We cut a lot of 2x4s out of Douglas fir. Americans use a lot of wood. And it's one of the reasons why it's so important to manage our national forest and other woodlands sustainably. And here on the national forest, it's one of the objectives of conservation to be able to manage these trees across the United States in a sustainable manner, because we still use an amazing amounts of wood. This whole building was built with wood, and it all came from forests, some forests in the West, and many of our New England forests. Some of them public, some of them private. I want to make one thing very clear. We hear a lot about our public lands now. You own the public lands. They are part of your heritage. The United States has more public land than almost any other place in the world. Our national parks, our national forests, wildlife refuges, you own them. You have a say in how they're managed. And most countries in the world, people come from all over the world to visit our national parks. And so it's very important that not only we have people that can work there and are doing their work, conservation work and preservation work professionally, but we support them in what they do. If you find a spot where that gets a little sunshine on the forest floor, you may come across a Columbia lily, a beautiful little plant that's fairly common in forests across northern United States. Okay, so I said that this is in two parts, and Jean and I spent a couple of months traveling to Washington and Oregon, met the Jacksons there, did a lot of hiking in the big trees, did some trout fishing, And then 2 years later, we went west again because we wanted to visit the sequoias and the redwoods. More big trees. This is California. And here is Sequoia National Park, Kings Canyon National Park, Yosemite National Park, the Tahoe National Forest. And these indications here are the locations of the sequoia trees, okay? And for about 200 miles from Lake Tahoe south to the Sequoia National Park and Sequoia National Forest is where the sequoias grow, okay? Along the coast of California, from Big Basin all the way north to the Oregon border is where the redwoods grow. And the difference is the fact that you have the Cascade Mountains along the coast, and again, you get the warm air coming off the Pacific, and the redwoods are essentially growing in rainforest, whereas the sequoias grow on the west side of the Sierra Nevada, where it is much drier, because the Cascade Mountains tend to take a lot of the rainfall, and so you get snow in the high Sierras, but you don't get near as much rainfall. There is one other place that we're going to visit, and that is here along the Nevada-California border. And that is the place called the Inyo National Forest. And we're going to go there in a minute and do some hiking. Any questions about what I've talked about here? Speak up. We love to camp. Go ahead, yeah.
I was curious, obviously here in New England, especially New Hampshire, we've been affected by the droughts this summer. Have they had similar droughts in California, or how are these forests currently doing?
All the time.
Well, of course, both the West and New Hampshire has been a period of drought. So when that happens, you have a lot less water running in our rivers. The species of trout here in New Hampshire, you get brown trout, but a lot of the trout that go into our rivers here are raised in hatcheries, where the trout in the West are some hatchery, some go into the rivers from hatcheries, but more native trout tend to be larger, and a number of different species. But they also have rainbow trout in the West, and of course a lot of different salmon coming out of the Pacific, migrating up up the rivers. Drought is a very serious problem for trout in the West. You get the rivers like the Madison and Yellowstone, Yellowstone River itself, great trout fisheries. But again, a lot dependent on us sustainably managing these. It's a natural resource. Does that answer your question at all? I don't know.
Yeah, no, it does, because I was piecing together what you had shared about the fog. And
Oh.
here we used to have more fog, and I went hiking the other day to Piper, and the trees at the very top, were not doing well. And so my husband
Okay,
said it's because
yes.
they don't have moisture, we haven't had the fog and the low clouds. I said, oh.
Well, New Hampshire had some serious air pollution problems. In the White Mountains, if you go, the higher you go, the more acid rain we were getting. So when you had fog and rainfall, it had a higher percentage of acid as a result of air from coal-burning plants in the Midwest coming into New England, and the rain and fog creating acid conditions in our rivers, which were negatively affecting trout reproduction. That was the biggest problem. And because when we passed the Clean Air Act and started to control the amount of pollution going to the air from coal-burning plants, considerably cut down on the amount of acid rain we have coming into New England. So this is a campground in Arkansas, on the very western boundary of Arkansas, called the Ouachita National Forest. And these are very typical of national forest campgrounds. The national forests tend to be a little more primitive than a lot of the national parks, just because of the crowds that go to the national parks. But you can see that we have electricity, a cement place to park the camper, good picnic areas. And these are really nice campgrounds, very similar to state parks. And you can make reservations in almost all of these national parks, national forest, and state park campgrounds. It's easy to do. Go online. And it's relatively inexpensive. We traveled very quickly back to the Sierra, and in the distance you see the High Sierra here, and we are camped about 7,000 feet in our trailer, and on the Inyo National Forest. And we're prepared to visit the bristlecone pine. The bristlecone pine is the oldest living thing that we know of. And so Gene and I wanted to go there and see the very oldest trees as well as the very biggest. And in traveling to the bristlecone pine area, we came across a high wetland that's just full of these blue irises. Pretty amazing sight. And if you pay attention as you go from place to place, travel, you come across, nature provides a lot of spectacular color. The High Sierra, this is in the spring. Yosemite National Park is about this area. These mountains are 11,000, 12,000 feet. We're traveling to the bristlecone pine on the Inyo National Forest. We're up around 9,000 feet now. And these are the bristlecone pine. This tree is probably 3,000 years old. And you can see that part of it is alive, part of it's dead. This part of the tree is alive, this part is dead. And it's very dry here. The combination of high elevation, of desert, means that things don't rot very quickly. And it's a perfect location for these bristlecone pine to grow. It's a close-up of the bristlecone pine cones, and these are what are called serotinous cones to foresters. They're a relatively small pine cone, very tight, And if you look closely, you can see the resinous sap in each cone. And within each one of these small areas is a bristlecone pine seed. And in order to release the seed, they either need fire or they need very high temperatures. Okay, so we're at 9,000 feet. So trees grow very slowly. And if you look closely here, you can see the annual rings of these trees. Every year the tree grows, every tree grows a little bit. All these trees outside the library grew this summer. They grew a bit less because they got a little less water because of the drought. Here it's very dry and very cold, so the trees grow very slowly. Most of these bristlecone pine are 2,000 and 3,000 years old. And the dendrochronologists study ancient weather conditions by studying how thick the annual wings on these bristlecone pines are. And they can tell 1,000 years ago whether there was a drought or whether there was good growing conditions or whether there was fire. Hot. The day we were there was well over 100 degrees. So Jean is all covered up with her hat, long pants, water, still enjoying the bristlecone pine and the Indian paintbush that are growing along the trails. But it's hot. And these amazing trees and these fantastic forms, you ever have a chance to get there, by all chance, go to see the bristlecone pine. From the Inyo National Forest, we traveled west a short distance into the High Sierra to the Sequoia National Forest and National Monument. And this is the place where I saw my first sequoia. Sequoia giganteum. That's the scientific name. These amazing trees. And this photo is called A Very Happy Man. And this tree is about 20 feet in diameter. So if you go from here to that wall, that's the size of this tree, growing 250 feet into the air. 2,000 years old. A fallen sequoia. Again, you don't want to fall off a fallen sequoia. And this is a plant. Here in the Sierra, they'll get up to 12 feet of snow in the winter. It's very important for these trees because it's dry here. Snowfall is extremely important to the rivers and to the sequoia. This is a plant called snow plant, and it's actually a fungus. It's like a mushroom. Every spring, as the snow is melting, the snow plants come up. They're red, bring a lot of color to the sequoia areas of the sequoia. The General Grant tree in Kings Canyon National Park. This is one of the largest sequoias. And this limb is 6 feet in diameter at 130 feet up the tree. So that's bigger than any white pine that we almost than we have in New England. the walk-through tree. You've seen pictures of this, and this is when you go to the places where these sequoias are, and they've cut these holes in the tree a long time ago. They don't do that anymore. But they're very popular places to get your arm around your best girl and get a photograph. The bark on sequoias is very thick, can be up 3 feet thick. This is what protects the tree from fire. And if you've been watching the news, you'll know there have been a lot of fire in the sequoias recently. So there's 6 feet of bark on the sequoias. Okay, on both sides of the tree, there's 3 feet of bark all around the tree. So there's a total of 6 feet. All right, so the fire burns up here. These layers of bark protect the tree from damage. These beautiful green lichens grow on the sequoias, getting some more color. And the western azaleas grow in these sequoia groves and are really quite beautiful. Some of the, you notice the little tufts on the end of his ears? The great horned owl, common in the sequoia groves. And this I call Beauty and the Beasts. And you can see the fire scars on these trees from low intensity fires that have been purposely set in the sequoia groves in order to help the sequoia drop their seed and to keep other vegetation under control around the sequoias. One of the problems we have in our forests is we've let Smokey Bear run amok and we've protected our forests from fire, and fire has been important ever since the Native Americans have been starting fires thousands of years ago. Fire has been important to our forests. Our national parks, national forest, were begun in the late 1800s. And Kings Canyon National Forest was all privately owned land, was bought both for the national forest and the national parks. These trees were cut back in the late 1800s before the public areas were created, and now the forests are growing back. This is called the dance hall tree. Back in the days, logging days, the loggers got a fiddler and their best girl or their best boyfriend, and they got up on the tops of these huge trees, and that's where they danced. And this is called the dance hall tree. I had heard about a tree on Kings Canyon National Park that John Muir visited. And in 1875, the Indians took John Muir to a tree they said was the biggest sequoia. And I wanted to visit that tree. And Gene and I found out where this tree was, and we went there. And it took us a while. We had to hike quite a ways. And this is a black stub that's long dead. When that tree was going, it was 35 feet in diameter at 4.5 feet. Now, all trees are measured at 4.5 feet. 4.5 feet is about here. I'm a short guy. 4.5 feet comes up to about my neck. Maybe if you're a tall person, it may be at your waist. But in any case, at 4.5 feet, this tree was 35 feet in diameter. And John Muir came here and walked inside of this tree and actually tried to count the annual rings on the tree and said that this tree was 4,000 years old when he saw it. Now the scientists tell us that he overestimated. It was probably 3,000 years old when it died. And this tree, when it was growing, was probably larger than the largest sequoia we know to tree, which is the General Sherman tree. But standing at a location where John Muir stood was important to me. John Muir was an amazing man, and he is responsible for the creation of Yosemite National Park and many of our national parks. Beauty and the Beast again. But all the bark is gone off this tree. It's been burned many, many times, unfortunately. But I'm going to go back here. This is the General Sherman tree. That is the largest living thing in the world. It is in the Mariposa Grove of Sequoia National Park. And you can see people down here. That's pretty amazing. And there's a picture on the back wall of the presidential sequoia, which is almost as big as this tree. Well, we're just about done. We have one last hike to take. But before we do that, I want to talk about The Wild Trees by Richard Preston. This book is available to you here in the library. This is the book that I read that told me I need to go see the Redwoods. It's an amazing book by a very good writer. And again, we wanted to come out here and see these trees with Bruce and Alexis Jackson. And Gene on the left, Alexis on the right. And so we met them at the Humboldt State Redwoods Park in Northern California. Again, this is a state park. And an organization called Save the Redwoods League helped protect these trees. They actually bought the land that was owned by the private timber companies and created this state park. And all of the land, the Redwoods National Park, the Jedediah Smith Redwoods State Park, all of that land was privately owned, acquired from private landowners to protect the redwoods. Now this book is about two guys, two young men who became fascinated by the redwoods. One is named Stephen Sillett and another Michael Taylor. And I want to read you, paraphrase, a paragraph from this book. In places, the redwood terrain was nearly impossible to get through. There were no roads or trails, no easy way in. Michael Taylor had a strong feeling that the most inaccessible parts of the redwood forest had never been explored. The world's tallest living thing was out there somewhere. He wondered if he could find it. And neither the Park Service nor the National Geographic Society that said they had found the tallest redwood really didn't know anything about the biggest redwoods. The trees that they had found were not the biggest trees. And that's what this book is about. Again, I want to read you a short paragraph from the book. In March of 1991, a park ranger reported that the Dyerville giant, considered one of the largest redwoods at the time, seemed to be leaning more than usual. The next morning was calm and windless. At about 7:45 a.m., a man who lived in a house overlooking the Eel River, a mile to the south of Founder's Grove, and on the far side of a ridge, was awakened by a deep roaring sound, followed by a boom that shook his house. He ran outdoors thinking that a freight train had derailed on the train line that ran below his house. The Dyerville giant had gone down, and this is the Dyerville giant. Okay. "17 feet in diameter. From the edge of the podium here, that's the size of the Dyerville giant. And that's the whole tree. That's the tree. And you can imagine what it must have been for something that big to fall. Yeah. And what they found out was, when they looked at the other trees surrounding it, they could find out that it was a lot taller than they had originally found out, because it's very difficult to measure the tops of these trees. And that was part of the reason that the National Geographic Society had no idea how tall these trees were. And we know now, but fire, even though this is a rainforest, is very important. These trees are thousands of years old. The biggest redwoods are probably 3,200 years old or older. So sometime during that time, there has been fire here. And it's obvious this is a fire scar, and this is a hollow redwood. And that's a big tree. Bruce Jackson and I hiked until we were too tired to hike anymore. And what we found out was it was very difficult to find these big trees. On this hike, we were looking for a tree called the Bull Creek Giant, and we never found it. And that tree was 20 feet in diameter. And when you get in those trees, there's a lot of other trees, and the vegetation around is very full. And it's difficult to move from place to place. And again, it's really easy to get lost. But we saw some amazing places. And this is typical of a redwood forest. And these trees are anywhere from 15, 16 feet in diameter, 300 or more feet high. The biggest redwood is 376 feet high. I mean, you can't hardly imagine that. So measuring them, now you can't measure them with a surveying tool. You have to actually climb the tree and drop a cord from top to bottom in order to measure how tall the tree is. So now, Stephen Sillett, the guy that this story is about, this is what him learning to climb these trees. And climbing up 375 foot of tree to the very top, You can see them on that picture in the back. And measuring the trees. So we were on Redwood National Park. The Roosevelt elk was fairly common there in the open fields. We did a lot of hiking in the redwoods. You can see Gina Lexus here on one of the trails, a good trail system there. You want to stay on the trails because you can get lost. Another fallen tree, and you can see how it's become a nurse tree with all of the trees growing on top of it. Banana slug. They don't taste like bananas.
How do you know? What it tastes like?
Everything I've said was the truth. Big leaf maple. These trees leaves are about as big as a dinner plate. They grow at the bottom of the forest, so because of the shade on these rainforests, the leaves have to be very big in order to produce chlorophyll. And there's the forester explaining how a tree grows. And Bruce is very good at that. And one of our visitors looking for a handout. Jedediah Smith State Park. Let me set the scene here. Sillett and Taylor had been hiking for hours, crawling over and under fallen redwoods. They were soaked near exhaustion, and the daylight was dimming. Taylor was leading the way. He climbed a redwood trunk that bridged a creek. Directly in front of him was a curving wall of wood that blocked his view. The wall was 30 feet across. It was the biggest redwood trunk he had seen in all his years of exploring the North Coast. He screamed in excitement. He named the tree the Screaming Titan. Around the edges of the glade stood a colonnade of undiscovered redwood titans, trees of enormous size in terms of mass. They are collectively the largest redwood trees on Earth. And that's what I wanted to find. And we did. Didn't find all of them, but we found them. And we're in Jedediah Smith State Park. I've done a lot of research online. I read the book several times, looked at the maps, and I thought that I generally knew where I could find these trees. And so we started our hunt. And with us was Bob, our friend, our forester friend who was going to help us. And Bruce is now visiting Bob out there. They're on a hunt. But here we are on the trail, and the GPS isn't working. And so I said, finally, I think we're close. Everybody stay here. I'm going to go off the trail, and I'm going to see if I can find these trees. And here we are close to, you can see the jackstrawed redwoods. This is what you climb on top of if you want to go from place to place. And the vegetation. And I found them. And what I found was, looking through the forest, I had seen a picture of one of these trees. And what I saw were these branches hanging down off of this tree. Now this tree is 22 feet in diameter, so you'd think you could find it. I couldn't see the tree. But I finally found these, and I thought, boy, that looks like those branches that I saw in the photo. And so I finally found the trees, and when I found this tree, then we found this tree. This is the Screaming Titan. This is 30 feet in diameter. From here to here at 4, you know. You can see this is a double tree. And this picture, hold on. Excuse me. There's Jean. You can see her. This is the Screaming Titan. This is another one of these massive trees. Of the 6 largest trees, this is one of them. And this is the largest redwood. This is called, let me get this right. This is called Del Norte Titan, the Del Norte Titan. This is 24 feet across. But the important thing about this tree is if you go up 100 feet, it's still like 22 feet. So it has this mass that goes straight up. And that's a very happy man. And that's the end of my story. So, sorry to keep you so long. I know some people want to watch football. But, so any questions?
Yeah, are any of these, any of the redwoods or the sequoias hardy in this area?
No.
No.
If you go to the Arboretum in Boston,
The dawn redwood?
you can see they have some redwoods there, but they don't grow to the height, to the size, obviously. And it'd be a couple thousand years before we ever got to that.
The redwood that they use for construction.
Yeah,
material,
Greg.
Is that only taken from trees that have already fallen?
Pardon me?
The redwood that they use for construction material, does that only come from fallen trees? Or are they
That's a
actually-
very good
or are they
question.
harvested still?
They can get it from fallen trees, but no. There is redwood that private landowners own redwood forest, and they harvest that, but almost all of it now is done sustainably because it's very valuable. And takes major equipment to, even at 100, 200, 300-year-old trees, they're still very big. They're big. So the redwood we get comes from basically sustainably managed redwood. Greg?
That was my question. Are there any commercial use and other commercial forests available still?
Yeah.
Thank you, you answered that.
Any other questions? I'll hang around if you have any questions.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for coming, and don't forget to grab a calendar if you have not grabbed a calendar yet. Have a good night, and go Red Sox.